Giovanna would wake up every day before sunrise to begin her arduous work in the fields. Her routine was exhausting, taking care of her younger siblings, helping her parents on the farm, and completing all the household chores assigned to her. Her life was marked by simplicity and a lack of opportunities, primarily because she had never been able to attend school. Despite everything, in her rare moments of free time, she tried to teach herself to read, flipping through the pages of an old book she had found in the house. One day, while she was trying to decipher some letters, her mother caught her. "Giovanna, put that book aside and come help prepare dinner," her mother called in a firm voice. "But, Mom, I just wanted to." "We don't have time for that, girl. Work doesn't wait," her mother interrupted before Giovanna could finish. The young girl sighed and reluctantly set the book aside. As the years passed, her younger siblings grew up and began taking over the tasks that once belonged to Giovanna, making her feel increasingly dispensable at home. Meanwhile, the pressure for her to get married intensified. "You're old enough to find a good husband," her father would often say, a man of few words but firm in his convictions. "I know, Dad," Giovanna would reply, but her heart would tighten at the thought of marrying without even exploring other possibilities in life. It was during a visit to a neighboring town that she learned about some vocational courses for young women. One course in particular caught her attention: sewing. Giovanna was enchanted by the skills she could develop and the beautiful dresses she could create. She began attending the classes, and each trip to the neighboring town was an adventure and a liberation from the constraints of her life on the farm. But her parents didn't see it that way. "You should be helping here, not wasting time on these silly things," her mother would scold whenever she returned late from class. Almost at the end of the course, a new opportunity arose. The project would expand its activities to teach reading and writing to the illiterate people in the region. This was the chance Giovanna had long dreamed of, but she knew her parents would never understand. One evening after dinner, her father called her for a talk on the porch. "Giovanna, your mother and I think it's time to end this course business. It's time for you to think about marriage." "But Dad, she tried to protest. "Listen here," her father interrupted. "We know what's best for you. It's time for you to stop with these ideas and settle down. You need a husband to take care of you." Giovanna felt a mix of frustration and sadness. She wanted to argue, to explain how much these courses meant to her, but she knew it would be in vain. That night, she couldn't sleep, torn between obedience to her family's wishes and her desire to pursue her own dreams. The next morning, with a determined expression, she made a decision. She went to the kitchen, where her mother was preparing breakfast, and said, "Mom, I need to talk to Mr. Antonio, the project coordinator. He offered to help me continue studying and I want to accept." Her mother looked at her, surprised and somewhat disappointed. "Are you sure, Giovanna?" "I am, Mom. I want more for my life. I want to be able to read and write and maybe even teach others one day." The conversation that followed wasn't easy, but for the first time, Giovanna felt she was taking control of her own life. With a heavy heart but full of hope, she left for another day of class, not just to learn how to sew but also to learn how to write her own story. The last days on the farm were extremely difficult for Giovanna. The weather was terrible, directly affecting the harvest and consequently the family's income, which was decreasing more and more. In this scenario of scarcity, the young woman became the primary target of her parents' frustrations. They couldn't understand why she spent so much time learning to sew and now wanted to learn to read and write, activities they saw as useless distractions. "You're not contributing as you should," her father accused, his tone leaving no room for argument. "And you still want to waste time with books and sewing?" "But Dad, this could give me a better future," she tried to justify herself, though her words seemed to evaporate before reaching her parents' ears. Her mother intervened with a decision already made. "We can't keep you here taking up space and eating what little we have. You're taking too long to get married." At only 20 years old and feeling pressured, Giovanna found herself pushed into a new life. Her parents arranged a job for her as a domestic servant in the city, in the home of a couple with 3 children. Although the news broke her heart, she had no choice. Tears streamed down her face as she packed her few belongings. "It's decided, and you're leaving tomorrow," her father concluded. Giovanna began her new life in her employer's house, a reality very different from what she was used to. Her routine was exhausting. She had to wake up before everyone else to prepare breakfast and was the last to go to bed after cleaning the kitchen at the end of the day. In addition to not receiving a salary, she had to be content with the humble accommodation at the back of the house. The lady of the house, a harsh and demanding woman, never seemed satisfied with Giovanna's work. "Look at this food, who could eat this?" she complained, grimacing in disgust as she pushed the plate away. "And this living room is still dirty. Do you want me to fire you?" Giovanna, unable to read or write and with very limited knowledge of the world beyond her village, felt increasingly trapped and isolated. The criticism and threats from her employer became a constant in her life. "If I fire you, you'll be out on the streets. Your parents have already made it clear they don't want you back." Every night, after an exhausting day of work, Giovanna would cry in her room. Sadness mingled with a sense of powerlessness. She saw no way out of her situation, and the threat of being thrown out and ending up on the streets terrified her. One day, after a particularly intense argument, during which her employer threatened to fire her over a minor cleaning mistake, Giovanna found herself at the end of her rope. She walked around the yard to clear her mind and hold back tears when she encountered the neighbor, an elderly man who often saw her taking care of the children. "Is everything all right, young lady?" the man asked, noticing her downcast expression. Giovanna hesitated, but the kindness in his voice encouraged her to open up. "No, sir, I don't know what to do anymore. The lady doesn't like me and threatens to fire me almost every day." The neighbor, moved by the young woman's plight, offered to help. "I'll talk to some people. Maybe we can find you a better place to work, where they'll respect your effort and dedication." Giovanna, relieved to have finally found an ally, thanked him with hopeful eyes. It wouldn't be an immediate or easy change, but the mere possibility of a better life gave her the strength to face the coming days. Unfortunately, the help never came. Giovanna had many suitors in the village where she lived but never really took an interest in any of them. Life in her employer's house had become unbearable, making any change seem like a relief. Ottavio, a slightly older truck driver, always paid attention to her whenever she passed by his house. He had an easy smile and pleasant conversation, which gradually won her over. On a particularly difficult day, after a severe reprimand from her employer, Giovanna found Ottavio fixing something on his truck. He noticed her downcast expression and called her over to talk. "Hi Giovanna, how are you today?" Ottavio asked, concerned. "Hi Ottavio, not so good," she replied, forcing a smile. "Want to take a ride? You look like you could use a break," he offered kindly. Giovanna accepted, and that ride marked the beginning of many others. Ottavio treated her with a respect she rarely experienced, making her feel valued. Over time, their friendship turned into something more, and they began going out to dinner when Ottavio was in town. Giovanna started to grow fond of him, appreciating his company and the sense of normalcy it brought to her life. One day, as Ottavio was helping her carry some groceries, he said, "Giovanna, I've been thinking. Why don't you come live with me? I don't like the thought of you being in that house, going through all that." Surprised but relieved, Giovanna accepted his offer. The idea of leaving her employer's house felt like a dream. However, before she left, she inadvertently overheard a conversation between her employers that revealed the true nature of her suffering. The lady of the house was consumed with jealousy, and the man had inappropriate intentions. This only reinforced Giovanna's decision to leave as soon as possible. Living with Ottavio, Giovanna found a peace she hadn't felt in a long time. Although Ottavio was a bit possessive, preventing her from working or attending school, he took good care of her and ensured she lacked nothing. She began studying at home with books Ottavio brought from his trips. Slowly, she learned to read simple words and form short sentences. Giovanna's life took a new turn when she discovered she was pregnant. The news was received with great joy by both of them. Ottavio, hopeful for a son, and Giovanna, indifferent to the gender, just wanted the child to be healthy. "If it's a girl, I'll name her Maria," she said lovingly, caressing her belly. "And if it's a boy, he'll be a great travel companion for me," Ottavio replied with a smile. When the time came, Giovanna gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Despite Ottavio's wishes, she decided to name the baby Tiago, a name she thought was beautiful and strong. Ottavio, though initially surprised, quickly grew to love the name and the child. Thus, amid challenges and changes, Giovanna continued her life with Ottavio, now with a new member in the family, filling their days with new hope and joy. Giovanna had prioritized her son Tiago's life from the day he was born. She had stopped studying to dedicate herself entirely to motherhood, a decision she never regretted as Tiago became her reason for living. Over the years, the boy grew into an intelligent and studious young man, thanks to his mother's relentless efforts to provide him with the best education possible, despite financial limitations and Ottavio's emotional distance. Ottavio, on the other hand, was a man who, while providing for the family, remained emotionally distant. He would spend days, sometimes weeks, away from home due to work, and when he returned, the atmosphere would become tense, often marked by irritation and minor conflicts that escalated into bigger arguments. Tiago, aware of the growing tension between his parents over the years, deeply wished he could offer his mother a better life. Finally, a milestone. A significant milestone had finally arrived for Tiago. He finished high school with excellent grades and was accepted into one of the best universities in the country, located in another state. The day of his departure was emotional for Giovanna, who oscillated between the sadness of their separation and the joy for the opportunities awaiting her son. On the morning of the farewell, Giovanna prepared breakfast while fighting back tears. "You're going to do amazing things, Tiago." "I know it," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Tiago, packing the last of his bags, paused and embraced his mother. "Mom, I'm sorry I never had time to teach you how to read and write," he murmured, guilt-lacing his words. "Don't worry about that, my son. You learning is enough for me," Giovanna replied, smiling through her tears. "I'm so proud of you." Tiago smiled sadly. "When I finish college, I'll come back and we'll live together in another house, far from all these bad memories." Ottavio wasn't there to say goodbye. As usual, he was traveling. Despite his physical and emotional absence, he had bought Tiago's plane ticket, a gesture his son appreciated despite everything. With her son already on his way to his new life, Giovanna returned to the now empty house, which echoed with the emptiness inside her. Yet, she was simultaneously flooded with happiness for the opportunities awaiting Tiago. Walking into her son's room, she gently touched the objects he had left behind, each one evoking memories of the many years they had spent together. Giovanna felt a deep sense of loneliness but was content knowing her son was pursuing a better future. Something she had always wanted for him, even if it meant facing her new reality alone. In the days that followed, Giovanna found solace in small routines and the support of neighbors who knew the family's story well. She began spending more time in the garden, tending to the plants that Tiago had loved as a child, finding in that simple activity a connection to her son who was now far away. Giovanna's life was in transition, and although she missed Tiago more with each passing day, she looked to the future with hope, knowing that every sacrifice had been made for a greater cause, the happiness and success of her son. Giovanna had been living in a state of growing isolation since Tiago, her son, had left for college. Ottavio, her husband, had become a stranger within their own home. Their rare conversations were short and often marked by a harsh tone that left Giovanna increasingly distressed. She felt her son's absence intensely, and Ottavio's emotional distance only amplified her sense of loneliness. One afternoon, unexpectedly different, Ottavio came home bearing a gift. Giovanna, surprised and confused by the unusual gesture, accepted it cautiously. "What's this, Ottavio?" "You never bring gifts," Giovanna said, trying to hide the suspicion in her voice. "It's just a little present. I thought it might cheer you up," Ottavio replied with a forced smile. The atmosphere was strangely mild, and Ottavio seemed more talkative than usual. However, as the conversation progressed, Giovanna felt that something was wrong. Finally, Ottavio revealed the true reason behind his change in behavior. "Giovanna, I need to be honest with you," Ottavio began hesitantly. "There was an incident. I went out with another woman, just once, but..." The following words hit Giovanna like a punch in the gut. Ottavio continued, explaining that the woman was pregnant and, due to her family's rejection, had nowhere to go. He planned to bring her to live with them. Giovanna, overwhelmed by a mix of shock and anger, couldn't contain her fury. "How could you do this to me, to your own wife?" she shouted, her words laden with pain and disbelief. Ottavio, in turn, responded with equal intensity. "This is my house. I pay the bills here. I decide what happens," he yelled, imposing his will. "If you're not happy, you can leave." Feeling utterly betrayed and helpless, Giovanna retreated to her room, locking herself in and crying for hours on end. She felt trapped, without options or support. Her financial and emotional dependence on Ottavio left her vulnerable and unable to react. The next morning, as promised, Ottavio brought Marissa, the pregnant woman, to their home. Marissa seemed as uncomfortable as Giovanna felt, her downcast eyes and tense body revealing her embarrassment. "Marissa, this is Giovanna. I hope you two can get along," Ottavio said, trying to ease the palpable tension. Marissa, with a trembling voice, merely nodded. "Hi," she murmured, clearly ashamed. Giovanna, still in shock, could barely look at Marissa. She felt as if she were living a nightmare, but her reality was undeniable. With her son far away, focused on his studies, and without the financial means to leave the house, she was indeed a prisoner of Ottavio's decisions. Time passed, with the house steeped in uncomfortable silence. Marissa tried to remain discreet, but her presence was a constant reminder of Ottavio's betrayal. Giovanna, on the other hand, struggled to maintain her composure for the sake of her own sanity, avoiding direct conflicts while contemplating ways to cope with her painful new reality. The situation was unsustainable, and each passing day made Giovanna more determined to find a way out, any way to regain her dignity and independence. Meanwhile, she kept everything hidden from Tiago, sacrificing her own happiness for the sake of her son's education, the only hope she had left for a better future for her family. Giovanna observed Marissa with a mix of anger and disdain. The young woman, only 18 years old, now lived under the same roof and slept in the room that once belonged to Tiago, representing everything that was wrong in Giovanna's life. At over 40 years old, Giovanna and Ottavio were facing an acute marital crisis, and Marissa's presence only served to deepen the open wounds. The tension in the house was palpable. Ottavio, visibly uncomfortable with the situation he had created, began making excuses to stay away, claiming he had too much work. Marissa, for her part, remained withdrawn, speaking as little as possible and always with her head down, as if trying to disappear within herself. On a typical late afternoon, as Giovanna prepared dinner in a heavy silence, Ottavio entered the kitchen. The atmosphere between them was colder than ever. "You need to treat Marissa better," Ottavio said abruptly, his tone almost commanding. Giovanna turned to him with a fierce look. "How dare you? You bring that girl into our home and expect me to welcome her with open arms." "She's pregnant, Giovanna. We need to think about the baby too," Ottavio retorted, his voice rising in frustration. "I don't want that baby here," Giovanna shouted, her face flushed with anger. The argument intensified and Giovanna, seething with indignation, could barely control her impulses. That night she barely slept, her mind swirling with dark thoughts. The next day, determined to resolve the situation once and for all, Giovanna went to the local pharmacy. She knew exactly what she was looking for, a stomach medication known for its complications during pregnancy. In the small rural community where she grew up, it was common for young women to take this medicine when they wanted to terminate an unwanted pregnancy. Back at home, her heart heavy, Giovanna crushed the capsules and dissolved the powder in a pitcher of water in the refrigerator. Each of her movements was mechanical, as if part of her refused to acknowledge the gravity of what she was about to do. Later that afternoon, Marissa, unaware, walked to the refrigerator and filled a glass with water. Giovanna watched from a distance, a forced smile hiding her growing nervousness. However, just as Marissa brought the glass to her lips, an image of Tiago crossed Giovanna's mind. She saw her son, the love of her life, and the reality of what was about to happen hit her with devastating force. In a sudden impulse of clarity and horror, Giovanna ran toward Marissa and slapped the glass out of her hand. The glass flew through the air and shattered on the kitchen floor, the water spreading like the tears that began to stream down Marissa's face. I'm so sorry," Giovanna stammered, her voice breaking with emotion. Marissa, frightened and crying, ran to her room, leaving Giovanna alone with the weight of her actions. Giovanna sank to the kitchen floor, the shards of glass scattered around her like a mirror reflecting her shattered life. In that moment she realized the abyss she had been about to fall into, and how devastating her actions could have been, not only for Marissa and the baby but for her own soul. The house, once filled with laughter and love, was now engulfed in shadows and regret, every corner a reminder of the choices that had led them to this point. After the incident in the kitchen, Giovanna was tormented by what she had almost done. She threw away all the contaminated water and, in an impulsive search for comfort, left the house and went to the church. There, she knelt before the altar, pouring out her soul in prayer, asking for forgiveness for an act that could never be undone but, by a twist of fate, had not been carried out. The hours she spent in the church were like a balm for her tormented heart. Giovanna cried, feeling the tears cleanse her soul of the guilt and despair that had driven her to consider such a drastic action. When she finally stood up, she felt calmer and determined to make amends for the harm she could have caused. Upon returning home, her first act was to knock on Marissa's door. With trembling hands she held a small package, a symbolic gift she had bought on her way back from the church. Marissa opened the door, visibly cautious, but her expression softened when she saw Giovanna with tears in her eyes and a small gift in hand. "Marissa, I'm so sorry for what happened today. I wasn't myself. Please accept this as an apology," Giovanna said, extending the package which contained a pair of baby shoes. Surprised and touched, Marissa accepted the gift. "Giovanna, I don't understand what you did, but I can see that you're truly sorry." "I am, Marissa, and I never meant to." Giovanna paused, unable to confess the whole truth. "You're not to blame for anything." In the days that followed, an unlikely bond began to form between the two women. Marissa started helping Giovanna with household chores, and their long conversations gradually turned into movie nights and sharing life stories. One day, as they tried to decipher a letter Giovanna had received, Marissa noticed that Giovanna struggled with reading. "Do you want me to help you read this?" Marissa asked gently. Giovanna, a little embarrassed, confessed her difficulty. Without hesitation, Marissa offered, "I can teach you to read if you'd like. It would be my pleasure." Moved by Marissa's kindness and generosity, Giovanna accepted the offer. Their reading lessons began immediately, and with each word Giovanna learned, her gratitude and respect for Marissa grew. In return, wanting to give back in some way, Giovanna decided to use her long-forgotten sewing skills to create something special for Marissa. She spent days going through old patterns and fabrics until she finally crafted an elegant dress for her. When Marissa tried on the dress, she couldn't hide her joy. "Giovanna, it's beautiful. I've never had anything so lovely," she said, admiring herself in the mirror. Marissa began wearing the dress often, feeling more and more comfortable and welcomed in the house. Meanwhile, Giovanna, though still learning to read with some difficulty, was now able to understand complete sentences, a testament to her determination and Marissa's patience. Ottavio watched this friendship bloom with a mix of surprise and discomfort. Although he found the sudden closeness between Giovanna and Marissa strange, he chose to remain distant and not interfere, perhaps realizing that any attempt to do so could trigger more conflicts. Thus, the house, which had once been a stage for so much resentment and pain, slowly began to fill with a new kind of energy, one sustained by the solidarity and newfound friendship between Giovanna and Marissa. The atmosphere in Giovanna's home had been completely transformed since Marissa arrived, bringing both tension and eventually an unexpected friendship. However, the moments of peace were often interrupted by Ottavio's explosive nature. One day before a business trip, Ottavio asked Marissa to iron his clothes. Distracted by the responsibilities and discomforts of her advanced pregnancy, Marissa forgot to fulfill the request. When Ottavio noticed that his clothes were still wrinkled, he confronted Marissa with an accusatory and demanding tone. "Marissa, I asked you to iron my clothes. How could you forget?" Ottavio barked, his anger evident in his voice. Marissa, exhausted and equally irritated, responded firmly, "You need to respect me, Ottavio. I'm not your maid." Anger flared in Ottavio and he lost all control, raising his hand in a threatening gesture. It was at that exact moment that Giovanna entered the room, drawn by the shouting. Seeing the scene, her fury overpowered her usual fear. "Ottavio, lower your hand now," she shouted with an authority she didn't know she possessed. "If you touch her, I'll call the police. You'll rot in jail for assaulting a pregnant woman." Ottavio froze in fear and surprise. For the first time in many years, he apologized, mumbling a plea for forgiveness as he lowered his hand. The tension of the moment, however, was too much for Marissa, who suddenly felt the first contractions. Quickly, Giovanna and Ottavio rushed her to the hospital, where she gave birth to a healthy baby boy, whom she decided to name Julio. Years passed since that tumultuous day. Tiago, Giovanna's son, had completed college and was returning home, full of expectations and longing. Upon arrival, he found a desolate scene, his father, Ottavio, alone and surrounded by empty alcohol cans. With a voice slurred by drink, Ottavio handed Tiago an address, informing him that Giovanna had moved out. Tiago, surprised and confused by the news of his parents' separation, immediately drove to the new address. The house was beautiful and well kept, a stark contrast to the desolation he had left behind. When Giovanna opened the door and saw her son, emotions overwhelmed her, and she cried with relief and happiness as she embraced him. After an emotional moment, Giovanna, wiping away her tears, invited Tiago to get to know the neighborhood. Walking to the house next door, she introduced Tiago to Marissa, who was with her boyfriend, watching Julio play in the garden. "Tiago, this is Marissa and her son, Julio. They are our neighbors and good friends," Giovanna explained with a shy smile. Marissa greeted Tiago with a nod, and he watched Julio, a cheerful and carefree boy, playing. Giovanna told him about Marissa and Julio, revealing that Julio was his half-brother. Tiago was surprised to learn he had a brother and was struck by the situation his mother was now living in. "Welcome back, Tiago. Your mother talks a lot about you," Marissa said with a warm smile. Tiago, still processing the changes, simply nodded, realizing that much had changed while he was away. He looked at his mother, who now seemed lighter and happier than he remembered. In that moment, despite all the surprises and changes, Tiago felt that he was finally home. Giovanna and Tiago sat in the newly decorated living room that Giovanna now called home. Tiago, still surprised and curious about the drastic changes in his mother's life, listened attentively as she shared the whole story. After Julio was born, Marissa got a job at a store and I took care of him. Things between me and Otavio began to improve a bit. He started to respect us more, Giovanna began, her eyes lost in the memories of the past few years. And the clothes I sewed for Marissa, they really changed our lives, she continued, a slow smile forming. She received so many compliments at work that people started asking for my contact. Soon, I was getting so many orders that I could barely keep up. Tiago listened impressed. So, you two started working together? He asked, trying to grasp the magnitude of the changes. Yes, Giovanna confirmed. Marissa left her job and we started our small operation together. But the demand kept growing, so we hired 2 more people, then 4 more. Now we have 8 employees in 2 stores. Giovanna paused, looking around the house. When we realized we had enough success to be independent, we decided there was no reason to stay with Otavio anymore. There was no anger, but there was also no reason to keep living that way. Forgiveness is one thing, continuing to live like that is another. Marissa and I bought our houses next to each other, she continued, smiling as she thought of her friend and business partner. She's like family. Tiago, still shocked by the transformations, felt a wave of relief and happiness at seeing his mother thriving. He got up to unpack his suitcase while Giovanna went over to Marissa's house to share a part of her story she had never revealed. Arriving next door, Giovanna found Marissa in the garden watching Julio play. Approaching slowly, Giovanna felt the weight of the past on her shoulders. Marissa, I need to tell you something that happened a long time ago, something I almost did, Giovanna began, her face showing the pain of that memory. Marissa listened attentively as Giovanna described the day when, consumed by anger and despair, she almost caused irreparable harm. The confession was difficult, and the words were heavy with guilt and regret. When Giovanna finished, the garden was wrapped in a heavy silence. After a long moment, Marissa finally spoke. Giovanna, that's in the past. It doesn't matter anymore. In the end, you did the right thing. You didn't let anger take over completely. That shows what a good person you are. Look at us now, we're better than ever, Marissa added softly, her voice full of understanding and forgiveness. The 2 women embraced, a gesture that sealed their forgiveness and acceptance. It was a hug that carried the weight of the past but also the lightness of a promising future. Both felt a deep gratitude for having each other, recognizing that from an extremely painful moment, a true and lasting friendship had been born. Meanwhile, Tiago, having finished unpacking his suitcase, joined them in the garden. Watching his mother and Marissa, he saw the strong bond that united them. The scene was peaceful, and he knew with a lighter heart that his mother's life had taken an unexpectedly beautiful and prosperous turn.
And if you liked this video, subscribe to the channel, like, comment and share this story.